Welcome to the studio review for the first of the two SQL studios. This is about movies. We are going to establish a database and called Movie Buff, and then we're going to have two tables, movies and directors, and then execute a number of queries to add data to it, to manipulate it, display the data in different ways, and then ultimately relate the tables and be able to perform some more complex queries on it. So they have a section here where you really just are intended to go through and understand where you're going and also set some things up. And then once we get done with the setup here, we're going to actually start on the assignment where we start writing queries. But we need to do all of this first. So I have opened up MySQL Workbench. I am going to start up my server there. Actually, it's already running. I'm going to go into it. And I'm going to create a new schema. And I've already got some of the files open that we're going to be using here. But as you can see, I do not have a movie buff schema. So I'm going to create it, clicking on this button right up here. And now I'm going to call it Movie Buff, and then come down here and click apply and close. And it executed a script behind the scenes to go ahead and create this. So if I come over now, I can see I've got the Movie Buff schema that has been created. This is going to be our database where we put our tables. You'll see that it says tables, but there's nothing to look at yet. Now, something that I want to point out is that if we want to start executing scripts on this, we're going to need to make sure that we have it selected. And right now it looks like it's selected. It is in fact not. You need to double click on it until it's bold. And once it's bold, even if you click up here, the one that's in bold, that's the one the scripts are going to get executed on. So make sure you do that. So once we've created that, then we're going to create some tables. So they tell you the first one we want to create is movies. We want to have the title, the year released, and the director. And we're also going to need a unique movie ID column, and that we're going to make that the primary key to make sure that every file, every record is unique, even if two movies had the same title. So we have to think about the values that we want, what data types they are, and make sure we use the right syntax for that with MySQL. And then down here, they give us this query already written that they show us how to do this, but we're going to type it out so we can kind of talk about it as we're doing it. So let's actually just go ahead and do that. So we're going to come up here and go to number one. I'm going to use create table as the command here and call it movies. And then I need to use parentheses so that everything inside establishes what all the different moving parts are. So the first thing is generally you put your ID first. So I'm going to say, I want a movie ID. It needs to be an integer. I also want it to be the primary key. So I use those keywords as well. And then the last thing I want to add is auto increment, because we want to let the database go ahead and assign those numbers for us so that we don't have to pass them in when we're creating new records. So if you look over here into this file we're going to be using, all they do is the first name, the last name, and the country for the directors, and the title, year released, and director ID for the movies. And that's going to mean that all of the IDs are actually created behind the scenes. Okay, so we're going to make this a varchar for title, because it's essentially a string. The year released, and notice I'm using underscores. Oh, and I forgot my comma up here. That's why it's got the red line. There we go. The year released, I'm using that underscore again. That's the correct syntax for naming your columns. And that's just an int, and then the director. And again, that's a varchar with a maximum length of 80. Okay, so there's a couple ways I can run this. This is my only query. So if I were, up here and I just wanted to run this now, I totally could. I also could select the entire thing and hit this button here. Or I can just leave my cursor here and it knows whichever query you're on, which of course is ended by a semicolon. So that's how it knows exactly how many lines to do. You can just hit this one with the cursor on it and run it. So let's do that. Now we see down here, and I know this writing is really tiny, but I have not found a way to make this bigger. It says create table movies and you have the little green check. So it was successfully done. And so you look over here and you say, okay, where is it? Right? I've got my tables. You have to come up here to this little refresh button, and that will actually create, make it come up and show that it's here. And there's, additional things you can look at here. Really, what we're interested in is just viewing the whole table. So I'm going to come over here with the name of the table selected and click on this little thing that looks like a chart. And that automatically runs a select to show me all of the columns and values for this particular table. So we're going to just leave this here. We haven't added any data to it yet, but that's, the first table that we created. So we're doing just fine. Let's come on down to directors table. Similarly, we want to create this table called directors. We want to have an ID that's a primary key. We also want this to auto increment. And then we want to have the first name, last name, and country. All of those are strings, so we can give them varchar types. So let's go ahead, and I am, for the sake of time, going to, since I've kind of already explained all the moving parts here, I'm just going to paste this in. And now I'll just leave my cursor on it, hit the button here with the cursor and run it. And we see down here a little green check. So we have success. And then same thing here. We don't see it yet, but I can refresh the schemas here. And now it appears. I can come over here and click on the little chart and open up a new tab that shows me all the columns, even though we don't have data yet. All right, so now we want to relate the tables. And they talk about how, right now we have a director table that actually has a director ID. And we have movie table that has a director name that was actually created as a varchar. But that's not a great way to relate your two tables. And this is a relational database. So what we really want to do is actually recreate movies to use the director ID as a value instead, so that we can relate those directly. And they teach you here about this concept of a foreign key. And the idea here is that you say, okay, each one of these tables has its own primary key, but if you want to relate to things, you can actually set a foreign key and say, I want the director ID from this table to reference the director ID from this other table. And that way they correspond to one another so that they can relate. So this is what we're going to do. First, we're going to drop it. There's a couple ways to drop. You can actually come in here and right click on the table and say drop table, but you also can do this script. So let's just use the drop table query here and do that part first. So we'll drop it. I'm going to run just this one. Okay, and now we see it's disappeared over here immediately. We have success. So now we need to recreate it. And this time we're going to use a query that looks a lot like our original one. In fact, instead of me just copying and pasting the whole thing, let's do this part. And then we're going to come in here and change this, just to be clear on what we're doing here. Change this to director ID, which means it's now an int. And then we need to set our foreign key. So again, foreign key is a keyword, references is a keyword, and you'll notice that things are in parentheses here because we're saying, this is the actual column name. And then out here in front of these parentheses over here, we're going to have the actual table name. So that's an important distinction. Okay, so let's do foreign key. Foreign key, and then we're going to say director ID is the column we want from this table. references. And this is where we say directors is the table, and we want the director ID, which is, of course, is the primary key in the directors table, as we established right here. Okay, so now I've got all of those things. I can execute the second one. And we have success. If I come over here and refresh the schemas, we see it show back up. I can come over here and open it up. And sure enough, we now have a director ID column instead of a director column. Okay. So the last thing to do is insert the data. They have provided us with a bunch of data in this file that I've already opened. If you haven't yet opened it, you could come up here to this second icon here and say you want to open, go into your file system and find it. You can see I've got it here and just say open. But since I've already done it, I'm going to say cancel. And I've got it right here. So all I need to do is execute this entire thing. It's going to use these inserts for all these directors, all of these movies. And they've already set it up to where the movies is using that director ID column that we just changed to start using. So I'm just going to not select anything. I'm just going to make sure I don't have anything selected, and then hit the first icon here to run the entire thing. And it should do it all at once. And you can see down here, we have lots of green checks, and everything is correctly inserted. So we can prove this by going to our tabs here for our tables, where we just have a general select. If you come down here in the result grid, you can hit this little refresh button, and now you see all the data is there. We'll do the same thing for movies. And there it is. All the data has now been correctly put into the table for each of these two. All right, so we have exactly what we needed to be able to start doing some queries. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do here is to list the titles of all the movies in the database. That is pretty straightforward. We can come over here and go to number 1 here and just say select title from movies. And you could even do this in one line if you want to, but I'm probably going to keep it this format just to make things super clear. Okay, so let's, I'm just going to put my cursor over this, come up and hit the cursor button, and there we go. We see just the title column because that's what we selected from the movies table. All right, number 2, list the title and the year of each movie in descending order. So this is where you're going to use select to say that we want the title and year columns from that database, but then we want to use order by for descending order. Okay, so we're going to say select title, comma, year released from movies, specify the table, and then say order by year released, and say DESC as the keyword to say we want it to be descending. All right, let's run it. And there we have it. Okay, so I'm going to move this up a little bit. Yeah, starting with 2019 all the way down to 1991. Great. Okay. Number 3, list all columns for all records of the director's table in ascending alphabetical order based on the director's country of origin. Okay. So select, and we can just say all, use the asterisk to indicate all from directors. That's the table. And you'll notice I did put it all in one line here. And then I'm just going to say order by country ascending. All right, run it. All right, we have Mexico, New Zealand, Saudi Arabia, Taiwan, and USA. So those are in alphabetical order ascending. All right. It says order by can also consider multiple columns. So we want to do the same thing we just did, but we also want to do a second ordering after the country of origin by the director's last name. So we can kind of look here and see, for example, in USAA, since we have, 5 of them, Lassiter, Bird, Foster, DuVernay, and Jenkins. So they're not in alphabetical order. So if we copy this and then just put a comma here and say last name and run it. Now we see that they are in alphabetical order, first by country and then by last name: Bird, DuVernay, Foster, Jenkins, Lassiter. All right. We're going to insert a new record into the directors table for Rob Reiner, who is American. So we can set his country. So we'll say insert into, and then the table name is movies. Nope, directors. Directors. And we want to specify that we are going to provide the information for first name, last name, and country. So that part is important. Say values, and then Rob, comma, Reiner, comma, USA. And I'm being careful here to use the exact same spelling abbreviation here as the other ones, just so we'll be able to sort, filter on that if we want to, and they'll all be the same. Yes, okay, so that should be it. So let's go ahead and run this. All right, if we go over to our directors now, we don't see it yet, but if we hit this blue refresh button, there we go. Record number 11 is Rob Reiner, USA. Okay, cool. So we can combine select and where to actually list the last name and director ID just for Rob Reiner to do a lookup. So we can say select last name and director ID from directors where last name equals Reiner. Okay, let's run this one. Oops, I misspelled my keyword. Let's fix that. There we go. And there we get it. Last name is Reiner, director ID is 11. So just remember that when you're writing these, whatever you say you're selecting right here, those are the column names that you want to actually show up. It doesn't mean that the other data isn't there behind the scenes. These are just all you're interested in looking at in the results. And of course, we chose to do this by Reiner. We could have just as easily said director ID equals 11, and that would have looked him up as well. Okay, now we want to insert a new record into the movies table for The Princess Bride, which of course was directed by Rob Reiner. So we can do something similar to what we did here with inserting into the directors table. Now we're going to insert into movies, and specifically, we want to add the title, the year released, and the director ID to make sure we correlate that. And then we can just say the values we want for those items are The Princess Bride, 1987, and 11. Okay, let's run that. And now if we come over to movies and hit the refresh button and come down here, we can see The Princess Bride now exists as the most recent record, number 17. Great. All right, number 8, if you list all of the data from the movies table, so select all using the asterisk, you'll see a column of director ID numbers, but that's not helpful if you want to actually see the names, right? So this is where joins are really useful, because you can provide specific values from 2 different tables because they are related using that foreign key that we set up. So let's go ahead and do this. We're going to say select. And we can just say select all from movies, but then do an inner join on directors and say on, which is the keyword that we use to say, here's what we want to correlate. And this is where we need to use dot notation, because we have both tables have columns of the exact same name, right? Director ID. So we're going to say movies dot director ID equals directors dot director ID. All right, let's run this one. All right, and there we go. We have, let me pull this up a little bit. All right, we have movie ID, title, year released, and director ID. So this is from, movies, and now it's giving us, in addition to that, it's giving us the information that comes from the director table as well, and we have everything all in one place. If you wanted to actually make that more specific and say I'm only interested in certain ones, then instead of doing the select all here, you could actually specify, I just want like movies.title and directors dot first name and maybe directors dot last name. And that's, then we're not bogged down by all of the other columns. We can see just the information we are most interested in. So let's rerun this with that new criteria. Yeah, and now we just have the 3 columns that we're most interested in, the titles and the first name. Titles coming from the movies table, first name and last name are coming from the directors table. But we use those director IDs to correlate them so that we can join that information together and present it in a way that's useful. All right, so we're going to do something a little bit similar, where we're going to list all the movies in the database along with the directors and then order it alphabetically by the director's last name. So really, we're just taking what we've already done and adding one more line. So I'm going to get in front of my semicolon there and say order by directors dot last name. And honestly, you don't have to do the directors if you don't want to, because there's no ambiguity. Last name only exists in directors, so it should be able to find it just fine. So let's run this. And there we go. Now all of the last names are in alphabetical orders, and therefore the entire record is in that same order. Yeah. All right. Number 10, list the first and last name for the director of The Incredibles. It says you can do this with a join or a where command, but for this step, use where. So there's a couple ways to approach this, but essentially, if you're going to do something like where, then you're going to have to put 2 different queries together. You're going to have a query and a subquery. So preliminary query would be just the where part. Like, let's just go make sure that we can find, who is the director of The Incredibles. That's what we want to narrow down, right? And then we can go about actually just displaying the first and the last name. So let's do a preliminary query just to prove that we're getting the results that we're looking for, and say select director ID. So this is the piece of information we need from movies where title equals The Incredibles. And this makes sense, right? Because we need the director ID for the movie that's Incredibles. That's step number 1. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to figure out how to display, without using a join. We're not going to figure out how to display anything from the director's table, because this is the only piece of information that the 2 tables have in common. So that's what we're going for. Give us that director ID and we can work with that. So that's the piece of information we need. Let's run it. And we'll see 2. Okay, so this entire expression returns the value 2. We can use that now. So we'll set up the whole thing that we really need, which is select first name, last name from the directors table. And there I go with my keywords again. Let me fix this. There we go. From directors. And we're going to say where director ID equals. And then we need to put this entire thing here in the parentheses so it can evaluate and run this first, get that number, and then when it runs the entire thing, it'll just say director ID equals 2, right? So let's do this. Run the whole thing. And we see Brad Bird. Okay, so that worked for us to be able to go and get the director ID here, and then use it as the criteria to filter down to just the first name and last name we needed for The Incredibles. All right, number 11. List the last name and the country of origin for the director of Roma. You can do this with either a join or a where command, but for this step, please use a join. So now we're going to do the opposite approach. And so this is going to be a little more straightforward in some ways. First name, we're still going to be looking for the first name and last name, and we're still going to be looking for it based on a specific movie. So we're going to say we're searching for those from directors, but then here's where we do the inner join as the method of relating the two tables. And we'll say, of course, movies.director ID equals directors.director ID. And oops, not ready for that yet. We have to actually specify where title equals Roma. And there again, I don't have to say movies.title because title only exists in one of the table, just like I didn't need to say director.first name and directors.last name here. You can, but you don't have to. The only time you really need to use that dot notation is when you have two keys that exist in both tables and you need to differentiate. All right, let's run it. And we see Alfonso Cuarón. Okay. Delete a row from the movies table. What consequence does this have on directors? List the contents of both tables to find out. All right. So we could, maybe go and just pick one of the, so let's look at the movies. We have movie IDs that run from 1 all the way down to 17. So we could choose any of those. Let's just choose 10. So we'll come back over here and say delete from with the table name movies, where, and this is very important, you have to specify a specific value so that you don't just, delete from, specifically delete this record, right? Okay, so let's run it. And now we come over here and look at the movies table and refresh it. And we'll see that it no longer has the record with the ID 10. If we go over to directors, it doesn't really change anything because the director is still going to be in this table, even if we deleted one of their movies. Because they're two different tables. Okay. However, number 13 is a little different. It says try to delete a person from the director's table and what error results from trying to remove a director. So we're going to specifically choose a director that still has movies in the movie tables. So I'm going to say remove from directors where director ID equals 1. So if we go over to movies, we can see that there are multiple movies, Toy Story and A Bug's Life, that have the same director there, number 1, which of course in the directors table we can see is John Lasseter. So we come back over here and try to run this. Pay attention to this action output down here at the bottom. So I'm going to run that, and we see a red X, and it says, it says what the query was. And then over here, and I can pull this out, I'll read it to you. It says error code 1451 cannot delete or update a parent row. A foreign key constraint fails. And then it goes into detail with the foreign key being director ID. So they're saying you're trying to delete a director, but you can't do that because the movies table is specifically using that director ID for some of its records. So you would have to actually go in and delete the movies first, and then it would allow you to delete the director. So that's the issue with that. So we can certainly write that query, but it's not going to be able to execute it. All right, let's get to the bonus missions. First bonus mission is to place some aliases in for the columns. So this is a way for you to actually just make things a little bit more concise because sometimes these things can get pretty long. So if we go, for example, to number 8, where we were selecting specific things here, we could say we want to represent the movies tables as M and the directors table as D. So that's a keyword as, and it allows you to give a separate name. And then from anywhere in the same query, whether it's ahead or behind, ahead or behind, you can change that out and say M, D, D, and then right here we can say M and D. And now we're using that alias everywhere so that it's a little bit shorter and cleaner and easier to read. So now let's say we want to run this again and prove that it works. And there you go. Okay, it says to do this in at least 3 of the items above. I've only done it in 1, but that's okay. You get the point. You could play around with this in some of the other ones and see if you could make it work. All right, list all of the movies in the database directed by Peter Jackson. We have a query we'll write down here. Let's just say we're interested in the titles. We'll keep it simple. Select title from movies, and then we're going to need to do an inner join on directors on movies.director_id equals directors.director_id. And then we need to specify where we could really just say first name equals Peter. And I'm putting this in parentheses because I want to check it by both first name and last name. What if you had multiple Peters? What if you had multiple Jacksons? You're going to need to have dual information. So we're going to use the and keyword and then say last name equals Jackson. All right. And then end it and let's run it. And there we have it. The title is The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. And you could, of course, add more columns if you were interested in more information. But I believe that's the spirit of bonus mission number 2. Okay, number 3 is a big one. We're going to have a number of things we need to do here. It says, add another column to the movies table that holds the amount of money earned by each film. Then use update to enter the values for the movies in the database. Then we can actually generate some lists. We can actually run some select queries. So the first thing is to add the column. And if we look at movies right now, we just have, movie ID, title, year released, and director ID. Let's call the new one earnings. And for this, when you want to add a new column, you use alter table, you name the table movies, and then just say, I want to add a column called earnings, and it's going to hold values of type int, just like that. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. I'm going to run this as is, and it went through. Now, if I come over here and I say refresh, nothing happens. And you're thinking, why is that? Well, it's because if you make a structural change like that, you're actually going to need to rerun your query up here in order to get the entire thing to refresh structurally, to actually show any new columns. So I'm just going to come up here and run the whole query. And now we see we have an earnings column, and it has right now all null values. Now, I'm not going to provide updates for every single one of these movies, all 17 of them, or I guess 16 of them, since we deleted number 10. But what I will do is do it for like 5 of them. So let's come back over to our query. All right. And I went over to this website, it's an IMDb thing, Box Office Mojo, and you can look up movies and get their total worldwide earnings. And so that's where I got my numbers from. But I'm just going to add these in real quick. I'm going to cut and paste. All right. So in each of these, I'm saying update the movies table, set the column earnings to the value, in this case, $394,436,586. And then I'm giving it the movie ID. Now, something that's important about this, if I was to actually do something like, what if I did, where title equals Toy Story, I would get an error because it protects the ability to do these kinds of operations unless you use the actual key, the primary key. So I'm using the primary key movie ID to make sure that it's setting it based on a very specific value that can't exist twice in that table. That's important because you could have a movie that had the same title, 2 different ones, but they would have different IDs. So it's important to use the IDs here. Okay, so I'm gonna select all 5 of these like this, and then I'm gonna use the first icon here to run just the ones I've highlighted. All right, now all 5 of them down here, we have green checks. If we come over to our movies table and hit refresh, now we have values for those 5 in this column, and you can see them right here. Okay, so we've done that. Now it's just a matter of doing the queries that they want us to do. So let's go back and take a look at that. Generate a list that ranks the movie titles based on the earnings. All right, let's just keep it easy and say select all. So select asterisk from movies, and then we'll say order by earnings. And we'll do descending. If we want to rank it, we want the highest one to be first. So we'll say descending. Let's run it. There we go. Okay, and we see that for the ones we added it anyway, we have them in descending order with The Lord of the Rings at $1 billion coming in first place. All right, last, generate a list that only shows films that earned above or below a certain amount. Okay, let's just do like select from movies, select all. And we're just going to say earnings is greater than, let's say 500 million. And run it. And there we have it. The only 2 of the 5 that I created that were above 500 million were The Incredibles and The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King. Awesome. Okay, that's it, guys. So I hope this has been helpful. We've learned a few new things in the process that weren't in the chapter. And this is going to give you a good foundation for the things we'll do in the next class.